Hello, hello, and welcome to the newest episode of Borderline Podcast Disorder. I'm Levy Lupu, your host, and I hope you're good. I hope you had a good week last week. I hope you're looking forward to the week ahead, or if you're not looking forward, I hope good things happen to you. Um, and what have I been up to? I've been working quite a bit. Nothing exciting, just a part of my day job. Um, been booking, some shows, recording a couple of podcast episodes, which I'm super excited to share with you. And I've actually I'm looking through changing my supplements, or like trying to get some different supplements in, because I've noticed that in the last few weeks, I want to say almost a month, I've just felt so tired constantly, and I was just sleeping. I felt sleepy most of the time, and I'm also struggling with a bit of body soreness, which I understand because I do I do work out much more regularly than I used to, but still I feel like I need to, do something to help me just feel a bit more rested and not, fall asleep and sleep for hours. Because like I remember, no, only about a year ago I was almost, what, like, housebound, because I was going through this episode of depression, and I was sleeping all the time. My back was hurting. I was just it's struggling, basically. I think I was just getting tired very easily. But I feel like this is different. Like, whatever I feel now, it's very different to how I felt last year, because now it's actually, I'm actually doing stuff, and I actually, and also, most importantly, I do not feel like I am struggling with depression, or with any sort of thoughts. I am stressed. I'll say that, and I am still working out in my head, how to get through some of the things, like financially and day to day stuff, and obviously that sorry, I get some tiredness coming from there, but it still feels quite heavy to, I don't know, to just feel as tired as I am. Like, I genuinely, I think I spend most of my days off sleeping. I don't do anything else but sleep. And even, like, if I have time throughout the day, when I've got some time to kill, I end up falling asleep during that time. So, it's not the best. And obviously, I am understanding that, you have to listen to your body, and, if your body wants you to rest, you have to rest. But it's been a month, it's been a while, and I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm not doing enough to to give my body what it needs, so that it doesn't have to feel as tired, it doesn't have to feel as sore, it doesn't have to feel all these things. And that's what I'm basically trying to figure out, and what I'm working through right now. Anyway, leaving that aside, there are some, I want to say, very exciting things happening soon. I'm working on basically putting a show together with one of my favorite comics in the London circuit, and hopefully we get to bring our show to a couple of, basically, to do a few runs at a couple of venues around London, and we're also potentially looking at taking it to festivals, which is so cool, and very looking forward to, again, mostly because I'll get to work with one of my favorite comics, and one of my favorite people in general, really one of my favorite person in general. um, so that's pretty cool, that's pretty exciting. However, for today's episode, I have an incredible guest. I am so happy to have had the opportunity to record with him and to talk to him, and that I get to share it with you all. And I hope you enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed taking the time and recording. And yeah, I think it's I personally think it's a great episode that you're about to listen to. I hope you feel like I'm right. um I think without anything else to add, because I don't think I have anything else to add for now. um Here is my conversation with the Stateless Citizen. Here is my conversation with him. Enjoy.
Levy, great to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, man. And I've watched. I came across your some of your content. Actually, someone else who reshared your content maybe like a week or so ago, and it's truly fascinating. So I'm very grateful you replied to my message and you said yes to doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I think I do a lot better in long form content. I mean, everyone has a story to tell, and I think I'm a better storyteller than a clip generator or TikTok maker or anything. So, yeah.
Well, first question is, how are you? How's things?
I'm doing all right, actually. The weather's not great, but it's the UK, so that's not a surprise. But otherwise, I'm fine.
I mean, it's been a nice few weeks, or like a better few
Sure.
weeks, and then it's just been miserable. Because I'm based in London,
Yeah.
so yeah, I can I feel I understand your feeling towards the weather. You know, well, now I feel like I want to ask you first to get started, because I also know, and I'm looking on. We'll plug it later, because I know you've got your own podcast. Is it also, actually, let's start there. Is the podcast going to be a regular thing, or do you only did it to basically share your story and that's it?
No, I started with a few episodes more about the Catholic faith or about philosophy, politics, religion. I like talking about that sort of stuff. The deportation was really the one that blew up, though. That's probably the most culturally relevant at the moment, got the most traction. But no, I'm really more about having conversations, and I care about things a lot more than just the deportation.
Okay. And so, yeah, what was the you touched on it, but what happened recently?
So recently, some ICE agents pulled over an Uber that I was in. I was actually taking an Uber to the airport in Chicago to head to a friend's wedding. Pulled over the Uber, uh, arrested me, took me to that Broadview facility. It's all over the news now. There's protesters outside, which is kind of surreal because I was there and then there was nothing abnormal going on. And now I see it and it's all over the news. And I'm like, I was in that building. But I was processed through that building and then went to a jail. So ICE in the United States, they use both their own detention centers, but they also contract with for-profit jails to store or hold the detainees until deportation. I was at the jail for 3 weeks. And then after those 3 weeks, I was put onto an American Airlines flight from the United States to London Heathrow and given a 10-year ban from any attempt at reentry to the United States.
I mean, this is all, fascinating. However, this is not the only thing that I want to cover with you, because I feel like your knowledge, it's wonderful. I want to get to know you more as well. But based on on this recent story, one of the things I was quite curious about, how come UK?
My mother was born in London, which either makes me or she was able to apply for my UK citizenship. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And now, before we delve more into that, I want to, for anyone who doesn't know you, how would you introduce yourself? Or like, how did you introduce yourself on the, even when you started to do the podcast or when you started to do the online content?
I have a whole life story, and it involves a lot of interesting tales and a lot of mistakes. And yet, those mistakes have been and are being redeemed, and I'm finding my true self, my true voice, and my true purpose. And I think that everyone does have a story, everyone has a journey to tell. And it's not about necessarily where you come from or where you came, but how where you came shapes you and how that forms your identity and the story that you want to tell. And in every moment, there is an underdog tale, there is opportunity for growth, there is opportunity for self reflection. And I'm just on a continual journey of trying to be a better person and trying to be where I need to be. And I'm documenting that and I'm having conversations that matter.
How did you get to be to have this sort of mentality, or to think about it in such a way? When did you um perhaps when did you realize that this is your I guess your mission?
Yeah, so I'm a religious guy. I'm Catholic, and I have been really a practicing Catholic since high school, or maybe you would call it, was that secondary school, like ages 14 to 18?
I went to school in Romania,
Okay,
so
okay,
actually I think we call it high school,
okay.
but I think in England is oh no, is it not college?
Yeah, college and then uni, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
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 okay.
because I think college is like from the age of 14 to 18.
Right. Okay, yeah. So at that age in high school, I converted or reverted into the Catholic faith, and that's shaped and formed a lot of my intellectual and spiritual formation, my moral views, of course. But it was always a bit distant, a bit remote, a bit head in the clouds. It's something that I think is true, and maybe it impacts my life, how I choose to live my life, what actions I take, how I repent and get back up and try and be better. But it didn't take root as far as social teachings or political philosophy and ideology until very recently. And I think that as things become more polarized and people become more radicalized in one direction or another, it is really important to understand the foundations and the roots of people's political ideologies. And I didn't realize how much Christianity or religion does matter, and how, like in Europe or in America, in the West, Western civilization is truly rooted in Christianity. And so a lot of people who maybe grew up without religion or fell away from religion, they don't realize they do have a sort of Christian or post Christian even worldview. And so as I've grown up and seen something like, let's say, liberalism, which is the idea that everyone should be free to do as they please, and no one should infringe on anyone else's liberties. Part of me has wondered or has seen the evidence of, does that really work? Because some people believe things that may be incompatible with other things. Or in the Christian West, those who fall away from religion, and then you think, well, okay, people are allowed to exercise their religion. Let's just keep that private. And I'm not religious. And if I were liberal, I'd say that I'm not religious, but you have the right to exercise your freedom of religion. I think that really only makes sense with religions that are somewhat tolerant of other religions. Hypothetically, if you were to invite everyone to the table and one religious group said, we are especially chosen and no one else matters, and we have divine right to rule over everyone. Well, you can't allow them at an open and liberal table because they don't respect liberality. Liberality has to be born from a society that is somewhat tolerant, from a society like liberalism came from Christian society. And so that was sort of my political awakening, is seeing not only the religious or irreligious roots of a lot of political movements, but the philosophical roots as well. I did study philosophy both in school and privately. And so getting to critically think and look at the roots of things, that's just shaped who I am now.
I mean, there are a lot of things I'm so intrigued to find out more about. But I'd say the first one, I guess, in chronological order would be, at the high school age, you for one to find this sort of again to reinstate the idea of faith. I think if I think about myself in high school, I've probably been the furthest I've ever been from religion,
Absolutely.
from practice, or even thinking about it. It's just so interesting that how it happened to you. Or is it, again, if you was it an active choice, I guess, or was it not an active choice? Because obviously it was, you've done it at your own will. But what were you thinking, I guess, at the time? Did you feel like this is the way things are going to turn out in the respect of who the person that you are today, or has it started from, I guess, a different reasoning?
No, not at all. And I think you're exactly spot on that high school, college, that age, adolescence, immediately after puberty, when people are growing into their bodies and finding themselves and their identity, that's the age where people do lose themselves and lose their religious value, maybe if it's not a firmly grounded or well formed religious faith. People do start to question their worldview and move away from it. And I think that's where a lot of people lose that. And that's what happened to me. And in my exploration of worldview and philosophy, I sort of traveled all the way around the world to come back to where I started. So it's not that I simply began to study one religion and picked it. I did explore. And so, yeah, that completely makes sense that you would have fallen away in that age. And I think another thing, I guess, that sort of formed who I am, because I didn't expect to be where I am. It was the religion and the philosophy, but also cultural events and being able to witness them. So COVID, the pandemic, and COVID era, everything that happened in America at that time, and I'm not sure what it was like over here, but a lot of COVID was scary, alarming even. It raised the alarms of a lot of like civilizational, societal, and political issues that go back to the roots of America. So for one, America's sort of known as it boasts as the anti-tyranny state. America, the founding fathers of America broke away from the monarchy and alleged tyranny of the United Kingdom or the British Empire. British Empire. And so in the founding documents of the United States, in the inalienable rights given to American citizens, are such things as life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, these freedoms. And then COVID came along. And as somewhat of an outside observer, but someone who lived in America, seeing the government overreach, the Biden administration, and I think they've admitted in congressional hearings, explicit censorship of social media platforms, reaching in and saying, you need to ban this word, this phrase, this account, even if it was true. And then watching National Guard, police marching down streets, making sure people stayed in their homes. For multiple reasons, this was so absurd to me, because fundamentally, what is COVID-19? It's a virus. It's a sickness. And the best thing for the prevention of, what do you call it? The best thing for inoculation against or prevention of contraction of a disease is just basic health. So getting outside, getting some sunlight, staying mobile, taking some vitamins if you need to, other ways to look at your own health or look after your own health. And these were absent from the conversations during COVID. It was a mandatory regime even of like the vaccinations. And the vaccinations, like you could see what they did to grant the emergency use authorization in the United States. So there was a systemic effort to silence and neutralize and censor voices who promoted other things, because to get under the FDA regulations, to get emergency use authorization in America, there has to be no other safe and effective treatment or alternative. And so the doctors, even like medical doctors who were suggesting alternatives, censored. The government would go to social media platforms, censored, lost their licenses, all of this. And I witnessed from a dissident perspective, looking at sort of the underground, looking at the way that the government colluded with major media entities like legacy media. Another example, looking at CNN and how Joe Rogan, podcaster, was taking, I believe it was ivermectin as a treatment for his COVID-19. And CNN had this display of Joe Rogan it was comical. They edited the photo to make him look yellow and sickly. And so looking at all this, I was thinking, what is going on? And the news, the legacy media, even social media, it's all about rhetoric. That's something I realized is how you phrase things, the way language is couched, what subtleties are buried in to hide truth. I think a lot of people lack the ability to think critically because maybe they haven't studied philosophy because we took it out of the core curriculum. And so being able to think critically, to get past rhetoric and dig into truth, and to be able to hear anyone's perspective, to listen to real kooks, because I pride myself on being able to hear anyone's perspective. So during COVID especially, you hear what the government has to say, you hear what one side has to say, and it's all the same sort of narrative. And then you look at the people that disagree and give them a fair shot and let truth come to the fore. That's what I've always valued. And in listening to the dissident perspectives, you do get some, the vaccine is the mark of the beast, and like some things that I don't know if there's clear evidence for that. We'll just say that, and try to maybe hyper spiritualize, hyper religious language things. But there's also much truth in the dissident perspective from people who are qualified and yet attempted to be censored. And so COVID, Black Lives Matter, religion, philosophy, all of those things have shaped who I am today.
Okay. Well, I think you. I can see. I've seen a little bit of myself in what you were talking about. The idea of like when the penny drops. The moment and like and some of the things that you've said. Although I think of myself as someone who I was kind of like just getting by with whatever. I'd be like, yeah, just whatever, just let's get on. But I always remembered, and also like I remember again in England it was a whole different thing. But having family still in Romania, then there was another thing there where there was like a curfew at 10 p.m. So then there was police patrolling the streets basically, and if you were outside after 10 p.m., they had the right to stop you. They had the right to ask you like where you're going. You could get fined. And then this whole thing came out where again it's still like I can't say it as it's factually correct, but I have heard the stories of how they would start the police would like try and stack up basically like tickets or because they have to like hit quotas of like we've made people pay this much, this many fines, etc.
Absolutely.
So I think that's when you're, or at least that the way I looked at it was pretty much like, I've always taken my liberties for granted, and now you're kind of like, this feels weird.
Yeah.
And I think you were talking as well about the one of the things I really enjoyed from what you said, I can relate to a lot from what you're saying, is the idea of like what the rhetoric and the social media and everything that you kind of like take on the news. And I remember it almost made me feel and I don't know if you've ever heard this perhaps this like train of thought before, but my mom used to tell me that like during communism there was only one news channel, so you take your news from that one news channel. So now obviously after communism ended, you had multiple news stations, and then you kind of get to pick which one you want to listen to, and then each one of them might have their own agenda. Fair enough, but again, at least there is a choice of it. And then we went through moving from TV onto social media, And now it's almost the same thing, where it's kind of like, if it's on social media, it goes back to the way it felt during communism, where it was like, oh, it must be true.
Must be.
Because it's right here.
It's the only voice you hear. It must be true.
You see, so then that's when I was like, oh, this, it's weird. And I get it, and I see what you're saying, and it's quite interesting to hear about the because you were talking about how even before you've your return to Catholicism, were you like into philosophy before that, or because you were talking about how you went and like you've done your research, and then you're like, hey, look, this is what feels, or like this is what sounds best for me?
I wouldn't say I was particularly into philosophy as a discipline of study, but I was more philosophically minded in terms of wondering about the nature of reality and being willing to explore answers to questions I had.
What was it like for you to go through this phase, through this phases? What was it like for you to go through all these discoveries? Because I can imagine, even, I'd say probably now, I'm the most I guess the most well written I've ever been. I'd like to think, although again, it's never the end, you can never know too much, but the younger you are, I feel like is the more overwhelming it must feel.
Yeah, it overwhelming is a good word, certainly. I think going through these phases, there was a lot of darkness before there was light, and I did struggle with mental health quite a bit in those days, because mental health is sort of, or it can be, symptomatic of a crisis of meaning. And I was searching for meaning for so long, because meaning, it shapes and forms and informs how you walk in every step of your life. If you don't have a like teleology, end goal, telos. So if you don't have a final step in the journey, every step you make doesn't make sense. And so a lot of times it's like you're walking south to end up north. And there's just so much in the world, so many steps that you can make, that doing anything just seems either pointless or overwhelming. And so, yeah, doing things without meaning didn't make any sense. And so it was difficult before I ended up choosing or finding a direction to journey in.
And obviously, the more you learn, things around you change. And obviously, before we touch again on like the most recent and probably significant, or like one of the most significant, changes. How did you feel? Because obviously that now you perhaps you've got you're on the quest for meaning, which the way you said it is beautiful. I'm a big fan of that. But obviously now at the points throughout this journey, there must have been, or were there actually, sorry, I don't want to assume, were there second thoughts? And if there were, perhaps say you've made one decision over the other, do you look back at the things that you again, like at those choices, and wish you've done it again? Are you pretty, at peace with things and able to, move on? What's your views on that?
I've certainly made mistakes and errors, but I don't regret all of them, because they did shape who I am. I would say the only mistakes that I regret are those that involved a betrayal of my own conscience. I think conscience is something that, what's the word? A great theologian, described conscience as the indwelling vicar of Christ in the soul. So if you imagine like religion and a religious teacher, imagine your conscience. You have the classic image of like the angel and the devil on the shoulder. So the conscience is something within you that's whispering, that's a representation of the good, the true good and the beautiful, that's leading you towards the true good and the beautiful.
Wow. This is really impressive. If you don't mind me asking again, just as a side question, do you count the amount of hours that you spent reading philosophy, or the amount of books or anything like that? Do you keep a track or like a log of it, or do you have an estimation?
I don't. I have an Audible library. Let me see how many Audible hours I have this year. So this is not 100% me because I have a shared account, but let's see. This Audible account has 20 days of listening time. I would say probably something like 15 days worth of listening. So 15 times 24 hours. I'm not a math major. Whatever 15 times 24 of those 15 times 24 hours of Audible listening time over the past year.
Right. Now, you're one of the things I'm actually very, very curious about is that obviously you're on the again, you're on this journey. You're learning about your faith. You're learning about philosophy. Then you also mentioned that you are open to difference, or the different opinions and the different views around you. You'd find in many people this is actually quite like a scary thing to have your judgment question, to have your thoughts question, to have your reasoning question. How did it feel like for you? How does it feel now?
I am very blessed because I have a lot of friends from and with diverse perspectives. So one of my best friends, even though I myself have ended up on the more conservative end of the political spectrum, even though I'm not a particularly political guy, one of my best friends works for a very high up Democratic politician in the US. I can't give too many details, but someone I went to high school with went to an Ivy League school and is highly involved in Democratic and left-wing and progressive politics. And I talk to him a little less regularly now. He's quite busy, but he's part of this group of friends that I have. And wherever we've all ended up, which is in very different places, we like to catch up, and we'll take usually an annual, maybe semi-annual, maybe every couple of years, a trip. There we it's called a tech cleanse. So we'll go no tech, leave our phones. And a lot of the trip is just having conversations, just talking, checking in, seeing where we've ended up, seeing what we believe, not arguing, but discussing politics, philosophy, religion, all these things. And I really hope that this friendship of mine, and many of them, I have many friendships like this with people I disagree with. I hope that they continue, even if I get louder and more public about my beliefs, about religion and other things. I hope that my friendships with people I disagree with continue, because I like to have conversations with people I disagree. It forms nuance in my opinions. Even if I don't change my mind, it adds layers of nuance to hear from different perspectives. And so I hope that they remain my friends. And as long as they do, I always have people that can push back or are willing to push back on what I say, and I'll issue clarifications or I'll change my mind. And there are several issues I've gone back and forth on over the years. I haven't just had one linear progression, but I've gone down several pipelines, several rabbit holes. I've gone places I shouldn't have, come back a little bit, gone in other directions. It's just how I develop and grow as a human being, and I'm shaped and formed by people I agree with and people I disagree with.
Right. I mean, this is fascinating, genuinely, because and to think that, especially at perhaps again like a very early age, when you'd think that the heat is up, like you're talking about like what, teens, late teens, early 20s. It's very, and again, as far as I can think about it, it's very easy to get very passionate. Perhaps on the perspective that you even mentioned, where sometimes you can go in different types of like rabbit holes. You can derail, then you have to come back, but you still need to have I don't know, just a very good sense of balance to always, even when you drift, to get back.
Absolutely.
What was that like? Well, again, even I guess with your like your inner circle, or friends, family, etc. When you've started growing like this, you've started speaking about the things that you believe in. Were you quite, I guess, for a lack of a better word, were you quite like closeted in that respect of like, oh, I'm not gonna have this conversation, I'm not gonna share these thoughts? What was that? Well, how did you feel throughout this journey?
Yeah, I've been quite quiet. I've been sort of studying and learning and seeing my views, how they play out in the real world. I haven't started speaking about anything until really recently. I can give you a quick anecdote back to the COVID thing. So when I came home, I was in university at the time when COVID hit and we were sent home. And I remember, actually it was later on, right, not the initial lockdown, but later on, we were sent home again. And I remember our school's like virology, biology, epidemiology department, they were doing testing for antibodies. And so I went to get screened to see if I had the antibodies, to see if I'd contracted COVID yet, because everyone knows it's not a surprise. The easiest and best way to have biological immunity against, or resilience against, a disease is to have contracted it. So I wanted to see if I had the antibodies prior to taking the vaccine. I got home. I told this to my mom because the first thing when I walked through the door when I got home, my mom said is, "We need to get you your vaccine appointment." And I told my mom this. I said, I'm waiting to get my antibody test back. I want to see if I have the antibodies because that's the best natural defense. And I want to wait. I'm not saying no to the vaccine. I just wanted to wait. And my mom looked at me and she was like, "Are you anti-vax?" And I almost laughed because it felt like I was talking to a physical representation of like CNN. I was like, this is not my mother who's speaking. Like, this is the ideology incarnate, because she's got this moniker, this pejorative, this slanderous name of like anti-vax. And it's like, what does that even mean? Because I'm not, it was just crazy to me. And it opened my, so I didn't talk much, but I observed. Like, COVID was really a time of great observation. And lo and behold, also, I did hold off. I eventually did get the vaccine because my stepfather is a little older and he sort of made it a condition of living under their roof, which I got to respect because, I'm an adult and I'm living there rent free. So if he wanted me to, ultimately, I got vaccinated. But I'm glad I did wait, because the vaccine I would have gotten as soon as I got home, but my mother wanted me to get, would have been the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was recalled. Yeah. So out of the Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was recalled. And so, good thing I hesitated. But in the moment, it was like, I have to face being called anti-vax for simply waiting to see what the best option is for me. And so I did observe. I observed through COVID. I observed through the Black Lives Matter movement. And by observed, I mean, I was like truly neutral. If I said any of my beliefs, it was in private, quiet company. I didn't post anything one way or another. I wasn't reactionary. I just observed. And I've been observing. And now I feel like, after the whole incident of deportation and how things are heating up in America, I feel confident to at least ask the questions that I have publicly.
Right. I mean, talking about your experience with your mom about the anti or your anti-vaxxer, I feel like, and again, I might be wrong, but as far as, or like, as well as my train of thought, or as further back as it goes, it kind of feels like that was genuinely a time when this sort of like the weaponization of words started. If you if you feel if you sense what I
Of
mean by
course.
it, it's kind of
Of
like,
course.
you must have. It's almost like, I think I've heard this before. I can't remember who, but someone said that, I think that's when we started almost like diagnosing people.
Absolutely.
And it was like, oh, you must be this and rather than, oh, you have your own
Mhm.
train of thought. Because again, I'm also on a similar side. I think given my previous day, my old day job, when I still had the dream of having like a career, we had to get the vaccine, and then I also had to do it because I had to fly to Romania for a family emergency. So again, it kind of like worked out well that I did it. It was the Pfizer one that I got, but I just remember that was actually quite a strange time, because it was a lot of, the way I saw it was a lot of, unnecessary hatred and heat. Because I think to an extent, I remember the penny dropped for me when, I don't know how familiar you are, there was a Djokovic incident when he wasn't allowed
The tennis player?
to get into Australia.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, he wasn't allowed to get into Australia because of because they were like, oh, if you're not vaccinated, you can't come in. And I remember people going like, oh, like he's, this guy is crazy. Like he's an anti-vaxxer. He's like a conspiracy theorist, etc. And I was like, and this was one of the analogies that I had. And I sometimes I put it on my stand-up as well, where it's like, even if I wanted to go like, you know what, I'm not going to get the vaccine, I would have been a hypocrite, because unfortunately, given my past experiences, I've done pretty much, not pretty much, but I've done some very like heavy drugs under the sun. So I've put that stuff in my system. If someone goes like, hey, get this vaccine, you're going to be allowed to fly. I can't go like, no, this is what I draw the line. Like I still eat takeout like probably twice a week. I can't be, I would have not, that was my train of my logic anyway. But I remember all these people kind of going like, oh, look at Djokovic, this guy, like, how can he say that? Oh, he's only going to put in his body whatever he believes, like whatever he trusts. And I remember having read his book. The guy haven't had a piece of chocolate in like 7 years, because he's the kind, like that's the sort of, that's how he treats his body basically.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, he doesn't eat gluten. He doesn't eat all these things that, he just goes like, it's not good for me, I'm not going to have it.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you know what, I'm on board with that.
Right.
And also, I think even on top of that, and that opened up then, the bigger door, which was like, ultimately is the freedom of choice.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And
which is a totally different, like, even if you wouldn't even need the reasoning. If you're like, hey, look, I'd rather not do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But seeing the sort of like, I remember even people who were like, oh yeah, Djokovic, greatest athlete in the history. And then now all of a sudden shift to, oh, the guy's like a lunatic. He goes like, oh, where is his like tinfoil hat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's the same guy.
Same guy.
That's the same guy last week.
But
you last week you were like, he's cool.
The thing about tyranny is that under tyranny, nothing is sacred. Nothing is exempt from whatever the current milieu, the current slogan, the current ideology is under tyranny. And COVID was such a great example of that. Tyranny doesn't survive without deceit. And we witnessed so many lies with COVID. And in hindsight, people don't even understand or realize how severe it was. Every day, CNN, because my mother was a daily CNN watcher. So I'd come home and it was on the TV. It was background. My mom she loves CNN. Anyway, they had the daily death count on the screen, and it was like a ticker that would go up. And let alone the fact that you can't track live deaths because it takes time to file death certificate and whatnot. But the fact that when they were reporting alongside mask mandates and like 6-foot social distancing rules, they made the claim, like it was all over the news, that the claim that states with looser restrictions, so like Florida had looser mask mandates, vaccine, all that, had higher mortality. But then, of course, looking at the dissident perspective, looking at beyond just the numbers, people who actually knew what they were talking about, or other people who knew what they were talking about. There were some other doctors, other epidemiologists who were looking, and someone analyzed and broke down the CNN statistics and said, these are not age adjusted. It doesn't make any sense. Florida has a lot of old people. It's in the south of the United States. It's a nice warm place to retire. So there are a lot of old people compared to like California, which is very young, bustling, active. And so no wonder more people were dying in Florida than in California, because the graph, the curvature of COVID skews heavily towards deaths for older individuals. But the statistics that CNN were displaying weren't age adjusted. And if you age adjusted the mortality rates, it turns out that states with looser restrictions and countries with looser restrictions did better. But that didn't fit the narrative. And I hesitate to accuse CNN or anyone there of deliberately misinforming the public, but it's a high level of irresponsibility for someone who's supposed to be broadcasting the news in a public forum. And I understand that there's an agenda. Sorry to cut you off, but I understand that there is an agenda, and you want people
No, don't worry about it. Please continue.
You want people to take the vaccine. You want people to get with the program. And so everyone in America is understanding, like, in hindsight, like, oh, well, there was a pandemic, so it's understandable. And it's like, if you can excuse tyranny for an emergency, then you can excuse tyranny for anything. Or you can just concoct an emergency to justify tyranny.
Well, you see, in this with this thought in mind, you mentioned something around the beginning when you were talking about the idea of, you know, the liberalism, right, and the way it works, or like the reasoning behind it being that, you know, you're free to do whatever you want to do as long as you're not intruding, or, like, you know, as long as you're not cutting on someone else's rights. Now, that was pretty much here it's a, I guess, the live definition of it being scratched, you know, because it's not in place anymore, and yet you form your own thoughts. You know, you're okay, like, this is what I believe is right, this is what I don't believe is right. But you still have to, perhaps, you know, what did it feel like for you to live in this moment where you kind of, like, not only that the doubling down, basically, that's what I was trying to walk into, like, where you notice this doubling down a lot more, and it's kind of like a lot more in your face, you know, where the contradictions are showing. And then even when people are perhaps being, you know, because again, you've seen it on the news where someone who was saying that, oh, 2 weeks ago, this is true, now this is true. But then you would ask them, what about what you said 2 weeks ago? And he's like, oh, I've never said that, or like, that never happened. How did that feel for you? Because obviously now, especially in the respects of, you know, you being a Christian, being a Catholic, you know, you have to be understanding, you have to, you know, be kind to other, and you have to, again, to just be understanding to others. But obviously there must be points where you're just fed up with all this, you know, you're just, you know, you've had enough. How do you manage to control those emotions? How do you manage to,
I think,
basically keep being yourself?
Yeah, one thing that's really important that's come out of all of this and all of my life circumstances is always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And I didn't come up with that. I heard that somewhere else. But it's shown me, like COVID, everything else, my entire life story has shown me that truth is really important. Truth will set you free, and it's important to live according to truth. So witnessing people who don't live according to the truth, there's always some double standard. There's always some crack somewhere, it goes wrong, and you can tell that person, there's something wrong. It's all built on sand. It will amount to nothing. Like the politicians or health advisors who are making the recommendations for the social distancing and the quarantining and whatnot. And then several of them were eventually like caught at their vacation homes or doing things they shouldn't have been doing according to their own policies. And I've learned more that even the little white lies, even the lies for a good reason, are wrong. And I don't know exactly how in every circumstance that would play out, but that's just what my orientation has become, is just live according to truth. Don't lie.
But then what happens again? How do you feel when you see the lie? You see someone uh, basically not doing something right. I guess, how do you deal with frustration?
How do I deal with frustration? Well, for one, turn to prayer. Prayer is the answer to many problems. And I understand for either irreligious or other religious individuals, prayer can mean different things, maybe even meditation or introspection, self-reflection, something that the human species is uniquely oriented and ordered to do. And I think that finding peace requires a level of self-reflection and introspection and meditation and prayer. That's what humans are meant to do. And you notice in the world, in the animal kingdom, day after day, year after year, and hundreds of years, the animals don't stop and look, and maybe they can't say it, but you don't really see animals pondering as if they're thinking, what a beautiful sunset it is tonight. People do that. Humans do that. We have that capacity to wonder and to apply critical thought to our wonder. That's what philosophy is. It's applied wonder. And so finding peace is, for me, to find myself, to become truly the fullness of what it means to be a human, and not something like a sheep or cattle or a slave, even a slave to my own passions, a slave to culture, a slave to what someone else influences me to be. That requires self-reflection, that requires meditation, that requires prayer, that requires doing everything a human is supposed to do. And it helps me to become more authentic when I reflect on myself, because I am still finding my identity. And authenticity is a kind of truth. People who are inauthentic are engaging in a kind of deceit. Politicians who use doublespeak, everyone can see that there's something deeply inauthentic about it. And that's unlikable because it is a kind of deceit. So how do I find peace? I pray. I think a lot.
Well, you see, now we're talking about the thinking. I think, and I talk from personal experience. That's when the biggest amount of the regret and I wish I did that in a different way. I wish I could go back in time. One of my favorite topics is time traveling. Happens. Obviously, you it almost feels like you're I would say incredibly grounded as a person. You seem incredibly,
Thank you.
yeah, I think that's that's it. Incredibly grounded. You seem like you can control yourself. But do you? Oh, actually, this is the thing. Do you feel? Are you actively listening to yourself? And are you actively in the respect of like emotions? I'm not talking about words. I'm talking about how you feel. Are you so basically? Are you suppressing how you actually feel, and then later on digesting it, or are you basically like this in real time?
I think that it's a balance between being authentic to myself and also fitting the context in which I exist. So I am an emotional person. I get sensational. I get hot. My one TikTok that blew up, it was particularly emotional. And maybe to a detriment, but that's the algorithm prioritizes that, of course. Of course, that's the one that blew up. And I racked my brain for a while. It sort of provoked my conscience because I'm thinking, oh, you know what? Maybe that's not my best work. I can't take it back, but I need to adjust what I said and I need to think about it differently. And even if that wasn't what I was intending to say, why did I say it? What was behind those emotions? So, yeah, I would say I try to be authentic wherever I am and with whoever I am. And that's something that I'm getting better at recently. In the past, I've definitely struggled with that, with, changing who I am depending on who I'm with. But that's a journey, and that's something that I'm discovering for myself. Yeah.
One of the things I'm actually very curious about is how does it feel for you to be here now, in the respect of the even, I guess, culturally, because I'd say, yeah, what's your thoughts into it? Like, how do you feel about being in the UK, having come here, and is it what you expected it to be? Obviously, again, you haven't gone into the circumstances of, oh, I'm just gonna move out of America and decide to live somewhere else. The circumstances, I understand, they are very unique, but still, how does UK feel for you?
The UK is a little different than I was perhaps expecting. As someone who lived in America without much real international travel, I had an idea of the UK, which I knew it wasn't all, Harry Potter and Downton Abbey land, but I did expect it to be a little different. You have this idea that America is this great global superpower, and yet it's the younger brother, it's the child of England, of the United Kingdom, of the British Empire. And so expecting to come here, I was sort of expecting to see maybe just an older sort of uh, Western European spirit, something great that's a little bit fallen, like the ashes of great civilization. It's a little more ashes than civilization at the moment, in some ways, in some respects. And let me clarify what I mean by that. It's it's different. It's definitely different than I expected. So one, the government, and there's a lot of social media, so a lot of that's sensational, a lot of it's hyped up, but understanding some government policies, the lack or the different interpretation of freedom of speech, including like non-crime hate incidents and harassment, and seeing people arrested for social media posts that are relatively innocent, not explicit calls for violence or threats of any kind, but just something that someone else is uncomfortable with. And also seeing the state of the urban decay in some places, in some areas. It is certainly economically, it seems closer to Ghana. When I visited Ghana when I was young, I was 9 years old, and I visited Ghana because one half of my family is from Ghana. And the UK actually seems a lot closer to Ghana and West Africa than it does to the United States. A lot of things here are reminiscent of Ghana, and maybe that's, of course, because Ghana was a British colony. Sure.
Sorry, we're back.
Good, good. Yeah, and that's, of course, it's not lost on me that Ghana was a British colony when it was the Gold Coast, but it appears that in a lot of ways, in interactions with different people, how people talk to each other and look at each other, the way people are dressing, acting, and I don't want to judge. I just got here. I'm just making observations, and these are my initial opinions, which are being developed every day. and there's more nuance being formed. But my initial observations were like, it feels like I'm watching not just the decay of a civilization, but the decline of somewhere developed, like regressing into somewhere developing, if that makes sense. And I know that can be offensive, so I don't want to have that misinterpreted. And I do want to say, like I'm new, and there's an extent to which a lot of my initial reactions are shaped by like I miss America, and this is different than America, and I'm still processing that and figuring that out. But yeah, those are my initial observations.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't generally like this. I want to say it like very clearly. This wasn't the sort of like trick question
Sure.
or anything like that. That was genuinely the case of I want to know, because I actually feel like, to me as a Romanian born, I grew up with like America being like the coolest thing ever, right? Um, then I remember even when I first got to England, although again it wasn't necessarily a choice made by the best of circumstances myself either, but it was kind of like, oh, this is cool, because like this is this is kind of like like you said, I was thinking again like the older brother of America, the older the older brother, basically, like the older, I don't know, cousin or uncle, and you're like, oh, this is cool. This is I remember at the time thinking, oh, it's only a couple hours away from Romania, but yet it's England. It's and having been here for what, almost 15 years, I see some of the things that you're saying, and that's why it's quite interesting, because sometimes you think like, is this in my head? And it's also quite nice that you've already touched on the fact that, look, you're still trying to process your own journey. What brought you here in the first place? You're trying to also, you're missing home.
Yeah.
So I get that it could be again like that. This could be your emotions can take over, your train of thought and whatever you how you see things. But no, it's quite interesting, and I think one of the things I found really surprising actually was something that I feel like not many people are talking about, is when we talk about like the non-hate crimes. Even before we talk about the rest, this is something that I thought about recently, and I was like, this is mind-blowing, is the fact that you can get a criminal record without knowing. So say you, and again, I'm actually quite this was another thing that I wanted to know about you, like how do you feel about it, and obviously now in your pursuit of like being like basically speaking publicly, whether you are focusing your energy solely on the US, or do you also look into UK and how to perhaps make this country better for the time that you're here.
Yeah.
But basically, sorry to interrupt you. I'll just change this quickly. It's just that basically, yeah, because my point was that the crime thing and getting a criminal record sometimes without even knowing, it's like it destroys careers. It destroys the possibility, I think, of buying a house.
Absolutely.
Because like all these things become much harder and that could be, again, sometimes even without knowing. That this is what to me I found the most fascinating, and it goes also into something else that you mentioned earlier with the tyranny bit, where it's kind of like you're pretty much in the respects of don't talk, or like don't you don't want to upset the establishment because you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't want to be on the bad side of the you don't want to be on the bad side of it. So anyway, yeah, sorry. Now my question was, how are you what's your thoughts in the regards of like, are you speaking about UK, or like are you interested in UK, the life here? I don't say necessarily politics. I don't find your content particularly political, I must say. I actually find it interesting and informative. So that, yeah, are you basically looking, or are you doing that as well, or is your main focus speaking about the US?
No. I think it's important to recognize that whatever circumstance you're in, that's where you are and where you're supposed to be and where you're supposed to be active. So as much as I am keeping updated with the happenings in America, I am a British passport holder and I live now in the United Kingdom. So I owe some filial devotion to this land and I intend to participate in the practices and the culture here. And I'm trying to acclimate and assimilate. And part of that is like there's civic duty to it. So I like I mentioned with thinking and reflecting, I released this initial video that goes viral and it's like I was emotional, of course. I was like, this place is a dump. And I called England. I didn't speak positively of England. And I thought for the next couple of days, I believe in a religion that isn't necessarily or primarily about being good and perfect, but about redemption and that system of being able to come from the bottom to aim towards the top. And so I thought about that and I realized, you know what? I did have a reaction and maybe I regret how I said it or I could have moderated my speech better, but I did have a reaction. But now I live here and I'm a citizen here. And what am I going to do about it? And so I have to go and I'm going to get some trash bags and maybe some clippers and whatnot and find a place and clean up. I have to. I said that and I intend to do that. And I'm going to post that publicly, not for the sake of public acclamation, but because, look, I did say something offensive about this country, but I also think there's a degree of truth in it and I'm going to do something about it. And so being here in the UK, I do recognize that this is my place to live and be and work and to make better.
Yeah. And I'm also curious to know that obviously you have this amazing, which by the way I didn't want to touch as much during this conversation, your deportation story, just because I know, and we are going to plug it. You're posting, you're talking about it on your own platform, and I want for you to keep that, or at least my intention is that you'll get the people who are listening to this to then check out your story told in full by yourself. But what's it like to, because I know and I actually I've seen it from a couple of your posts where you're like, this is I've seen the idea, and again, sorry, I'm gonna butcher it, butcher it. But you were talking about how you want to turn a sad story into, now's the time to turn it into a positive one.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel, and also, like, do many people in the UK that you're kind of like on contact with every day know the story behind how you got here? Do you tend to keep that private? And then, as well as when you meet or when you talk to people who actually know your story, how do you feel about the if there is a constant, or if there is a lot of, I guess, sobbing, for a lack of a better word, that you're getting from people? How do you manage that? Because I can imagine, and again, the closest I can think of, it's the grief of a loved one,
Mm-hmm.
for me, where it's kind of like, oh, every time you hear, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, you're kind of like, I'm tired to hear that now.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So for the most part, again, don't lie. So if people ask me, my general answer is, how did I get to the UK? If people notice that, I'm new here or I don't have a UK accent. Where are you from? I grew up in America. Oh, what brings you to the UK? I'll say immigration, which that's not a lie. That's technically true. For people that are closer to me and I think have a greater right to know who I am and my story, and if that's like more pertinent to the conversation, I'll explain. But in passing, just meeting people, immigration, that's the standard answer. And then next topic of conversation. And it's a quick interaction anyway. So that's my go-to. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And well, I guess now is the right time to is the right time to ask you then, what's your social media handle, and where do people find your work, and also if you can give us a little perhaps teaser on what you've got out there and what you've got coming next. I'd love to hear that.
All right. So I am on TikTok. The handle is at stateless.citizen. Instagram, Stateless Citizen as well. X, and Apple and Spotify podcasts. My bread and butter is the long form content. It is the Stateless Citizen show on Apple and Spotify podcasts. I prefer long form content. Any of the Instagram or TikTok short stuff is really just to generate traffic to drive to the podcast. I've talked about so far politics and, well, I haven't been too political so far, but I've talked about religion and philosophy, and I intend to talk more about how those play out in the world and the real world implications of religious beliefs and whatnot. But yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, do you want to? Would you accept to give us a little, insight of like what's your thought on that? What's your thought on the how philosophy and religion plays a role into today's society or society in general?
I think that as Christianity fades or has faded away from the center of political and social life, we are seeing the consequences of abandoning things which are uniquely Christian. So, one, universal human fraternity and charity that appears to be absent in almost every other religion or ideology. And two, definitely forgiveness of enemies, of one's enemies. So, revenge is a very natural human instinct, and that applies to both the individual and the state. So, someone's or some state's individual ideology or political ideology can be such that if someone is aggressive, it is virtuous to be aggressive back. There are some religious groups that say if someone strikes you, it is just to strike them back, and you ought to do so. And Christianity teaches you must turn the other cheek. You defend the innocent, of course, but turn the other cheek, forgive your oppressors, and pray for those who persecute you. Forgive your enemies. As that disappears, it's really interesting to see just how vengeful, how unforgiving a lot of people have become in the West, even those who come from Christian homes and have abandoned it.
Wow, that's good stuff, man.
I think so.
I'm generally, and I as I was listening to you, I was already thinking about the times when I've perhaps gave in on that, and I think it's very relatable, and I love it, and I'm a huge fan. Again, I'm very very grateful that I have managed to to find your content, to find to find out about you out there, and to also I'm very grateful for you to have taken the time today to do this, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Best. My pleasure. Well, look after yourself, and stay in touch. Take care.
All right, you do the same.
Okay, well, that's it. There is a lot more to the deportation story, but for that, I strongly suggest or recommend, or however the best phrasing is, to go directly to the Stateless Citizen podcast and take it from the source. And I hope you enjoyed the episode today. That's it from me for this week. Um, Again, there are a couple of things to announce, and there are things I'm working on, but they are not officially official yet. So I'm not gonna say more than that for now. We'll be back next week. Until then, from me, Pickle and Sarma, stay skillful and look after yourselves. God bless. Goodbye.